I received a message on Instagram with someone who is looking to do some motion tracking with text, similar to what you see here on the screen. They have some point on the screen and they want to track the text over time so it follows those points. So motion includes a tracking behavior to help us with this task. And I believe the Apple support document says it best. They say the tracking behaviors in motion analyze an area of pixels, known as a reference pattern, over a range of frames in a movie clip to lock onto that pattern as it moves across the canvas. So it's a pretty technical way of saying, tell us what area of the video, like a little piece of this person's hair or their forehead, and motion will try to analyze that area and track it over time. So I'm going to show a few different methods of using this behavior and kind of this set of motion tracking behaviors that's included with motion. I do expect this to be a longer video, so sit back and relax as we go through this. The first thing I want to show is how I created this video that you see here, simply with text over a person's head, tracking them as he walks through this crowd of people. So I'm going to start from scratch on this one. I'm going to go up to File and create a new project. You can also use Command N. It is going to be a motion project, and I'm going to keep all of these, I believe, at 1080 for the resolution and frame rate. If you're new to motion, you definitely want to make sure you're selecting the correct preset and frame rate, as well as setting a duration. You can change some of these things later on, but it's good to try and get them correct. I'm going to click on Open to create this new motion project. I'm going to immediately do Command S to save the project. Unlike Final Cut Pro 10, these projects are not auto-saved in the same way that Final Cut does it. So make sure to be saving as you're working through this project, because you can very easily lose something over time. So I'm just going to call it Final Cut Pro Help, save that project, and now we're here in the default motion layout, which just has an empty group layer. So what I need to do is bring in the content I actually want to use. I'm going to use Command Tab to switch over to the Finder. And here I have the video of people walking. I'm just going to drag that into my initial group that's inside of motion. So now if I look at this project, I can go through and play it. I'm just going to skim through it really quickly. It's a 10-second project, but this clip is actually about 20 seconds. So if you don't set the time correctly, you can go in the little timecode viewer in the middle here, click on this button to see the total project duration. I'm just going to double click on it, hit 2, 0, period. The period puts in 2 zeros, hit return, and now I've changed the project duration to be 20 seconds. I'm going to use function right arrow, or similar to the N key, and I'm going to go over to the end of the project here where the end of the video is, and do Command Option O to set an out point, and then Shift Z to fit this all in the canvas. Again, a whole bunch of shortcuts there, but just if you're trying to get used to motion, that's a good way to start getting used to it, is seeing how people use the shortcuts and get around the interface. So now we have the full clip here of these people walking. This is just a stock video clip I got offline, so that is available for anyone to use and publish. So definitely don't hesitate to go out there and get those stock clips and use those for practice. They're great. So how do I get this tracking thing underway? Well, I'm going to select the video clip that I want the tracker to be applied to. I'm going to go up to the Behaviors group, and under Behaviors there's a category for motion tracking, and in this case I just want to analyze some motion. So I'm going to use the Analyze Motion behavior. When I do that, in the middle of the screen there's a little tracker here that it's put down, and I'm going to click and drag this over to where I want to track. Now, the way that the tracker works, as I said from the beginning, it's trying to analyze in kind of an area of pixels. So we want to make sure that the area of pixels is something that's going to be easy to track. If it's all the same shade of one color, for example, like the middle of this guy's jacket in the front, this dark blue, that's going to be much harder for a tracker to work successfully. However, if we move the tracker over to his sleeve over here on the right, there's an area of white, this white patch that's on his shoulder, and the dark blue. So that kind of contrast is going to be easier for the tracker to work with. In a similar way, I'm going to track this guy's head because that's actually where I want the text to go. So I'm going to put the tracker right over an area of where his hair and forehead meet, because that's basically a very dark area and a very light area meeting. So it should be all right to track. With that set, I'm going to go into the inspector. Here's our tracker behavior or analyze motion area. So this is going to be the actual tracker. We've already added the point, so I'm just going to analyze it. I'm going to click on analyze, and it's going to do it from where the playhead is. So you want to make sure your playhead is set at the beginning of the clip, and then you can start the analyzing. Now this part is going to take some time because this is your computer processing. If you have a faster computer, it may work much quicker. If you have a much slower MacBook or something like that, it may not go as fast. Now in this case, you'll see that it's actually doing a fairly good job of tracking. I haven't run into any issues. I'm watching that middle point as it moves around in the viewer here, and it seems to be going pretty well here. So that's awesome to see, right? It's doing a really great job. But in a second here, he's going to move over right here and go off screen, and now the tracker doesn't know where his head went, which makes sense. It gets lost. It doesn't know where to go. So this is going to be where we need to correct this tracker. If I scrub through back here, looking at the point that's in there, all of this data works really well. And that's awesome. That's exactly what I want to see. But now I need to correct the end here. So in my timing area at the bottom here, I'm looking specifically at the keyframe editor. So if you don't see that, you can go over on the right side of the toolbar and click on that to see the keyframe editor. I'm actually going to resize some of this interface to make the keyframe editor a little bit bigger, and really I don't need the video part, so I can just hide that too. So what am I going to do here to edit these points? Well, first I'm actually going to go to where his forehead comes back, which is right here. And what I'm going to do is move the crosshairs over to where his forehead is, which is right about there. And I'm going to hit analyze again. And what I'm really doing here is just analyzing those last couple frames. And if it didn't work, like it did here, it didn't really do a good job of analyzing it, I'm going to go over one more frame. I'm going to move the crosshairs over, so right about there, and then I'll hit analyze again. Now what you should get from this is that you're able to continually analyze many different areas of the clip. So if you have a clip where maybe someone's waving and you're trying to track their hand, but if their hand goes off screen and then comes back on screen, maybe back and forth, you can just skip and analyze the parts that are on screen, because that at least gives us some data that we can work with. So now what I'm going to do is actually edit the points that have been created. So I've analyzed really everything I can, and now I want to fix this area when it goes, when he's behind that other person back here. So to do that, I'm looking at these keyframes, and I'm actually going to delete a whole bunch of them, because these keyframes, which are these little diamonds, are useless for this whole area when he's behind. So looking at our gentleman's forehead here, I'm looking at this little white point because that's where our tracker is. It's good there. It looks like it's good in these frames. It's okay there. I'm using my right arrow to navigate. And then right here, this keyframe, that's probably the last one that's okay, because then it looks like it jumps on to this other guy's head, and this is where it's getting lost. So that means all of these keyframes I can go and delete. And I'm just clicking and dragging across them. Then I'm going to hit the delete key on the keyboard to remove those keyframes. I'm going to go forward on my playhead here, and let's see. The first one that's usable again is really this one here. So I'm going to delete the rest of these. And again, just clicking and dragging in the keyframe editor here, just going through to click and drag to select those, and then I hit delete to remove those. So now what I see is we have all the craziness that's happening here when his head is going back and forth, and then we have a little wave down, it goes over, and it gets to this point where his head goes behind, and then it's just a straight line over to the right side, which for the most part is okay, but you might want a little waviness up and down with this part. And you can do that just by going into the properties, and we'll be able to add keyframes on the actual property itself. But we're not to that point right now. This is just to get the general tracking information, so that looks pretty good. Okay, so now how can you actually use that, the tracking information, right? So let's do this. What I want to do is create a text track that can be the text that's floating above his head. In the intro there, you saw it was just the @Final Cut Pro help text. So I'm going to do the same thing here, clicking anywhere there with the text tool, and then @Final Cut Pro help. Obviously, I can't see that really well, so I'm going to use the inspector to change the color to black. We'll add an outline. Red is fine. I can go to the format section to increase the size. Again, all the things that you can do on your own. Pretty straightforward. Maybe it's a little too big. We'll shrink it down. Okay, so now I have the text. Looks pretty good, but how do I utilize the tracker, right? So I just want the tracker to determine where the position is for this text. So I have the text selected, and in the inspector, I'm under the properties inspector, and we have the position parameter. So if you change this, you can see if I adjust any of these, the text there moves around, right? So to the right of all of these parameters, there's a little tiny triangle that you can hit over here, a little drop-down menu. And if you click on that, there's an option here to add a parameter behavior. And what this means is we're putting a behavior on the position parameter in this case. And I'm just going to use the track parameter behavior. So by clicking on track, it brings up the track behavior. I want a source to be what we're looking at for the actual movement. So my source, I can either hit this drop-down menu and select it, or I can go over in the layers and just drag my analyze motion off of the video of people walking into the well here, just in that little drop area. And that should be pretty good, right? So if I drag across, notice the Final Cut Pro text is now moving, following that person along. Now you'll notice here it cuts out because I don't have the timing correct. So I'm going to go back to my video timeline. Let's do Shift-Z to zoom out. And I'll drag the text all the way back to the beginning. And now we should see this text moving around. And notice, yeah, it does a pretty good job, right? Right above his head, following. We don't look at any rotation or anything else. It's just the actual position of where this person's walking. Now, at the end there, we can see an issue, right? When he walks off the screen, then it has a problem. And even when he's behind this other person's head, it's kind of a straight movement. It doesn't look as fluid as it does when he was walking around. So this is where we want to start to add keyframes to our position. Now you can mix this tracking behavior and this tracking motion with keyframes. Nothing wrong with that. If anything, you should get pretty well at moving that stuff around, get good at it. It's a skill you'll want. So I'm going to go right to where the tracking ends, which is right here. I'm going to go over and hit the Add Keyframe button, which is the one next to the little drop-down menu we clicked a second ago. I hit Add Keyframe. I'm going to go a couple of frames to the right, and I'm going to use the viewer here just to move this. Maybe we go down a little bit, go to the right. We can move this up, go to the right a couple more frames, move it down, go to the right, move it up. I can kind of move this wherever I want, right? And it's going to follow that path. So now right here, really we want the text to be all the way down. So I'm just going to move it over to where it should be, which is probably right about there above his head. And we'll just move this down a little bit just to create some extra movement in that flat spot. So now I'm going to click off of everything so it's unselected. If we watch when the text goes behind, it kind of has a little bit more movement. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for when the tracking information gets lost as he goes off the screen, which is going to be right here. I'm going to add another keyframe, and I'm going to go to the right a couple frames. We're going to add some movement to this, right a couple frames, drop it down, right a couple frames, move it off. Really, it should be probably right about there, right? So let me go back. We're going to move these ones over. And if you do what I just did here, where I kind of added a whole bunch of keyframes I don't want, use your timeline here, right? You can go into the keyframe editor, select them, and just hit delete to remove those keyframes, because I have this big dip here that really I don't need, so I'm going to remove that, because right here, we should go over. It should be going pretty much straight over with our keyframes. And off. Well, he's still up there, so we'll move back. Keyframe's no good. This one's no good. No good. here he is, and then we'll just go down a little bit. Hopefully you get the idea with this, that he then moves off screen. Okay, so Shift Z, zoom out. We'll watch this again from the beginning without anything selected. We can see the text is moving along. And with this whole process, you should be seeing that it's not straightforward, right? It's not just like you can track it and be done. Like there is going to be a lot of work as you mess around with these other things and other kind of factors come into play. So that's one way to use analyze motion, which is when we select, just to summarize here, we have the video layer selected. We went up to behavior, basic motion, and we used, motion tracking, and we used the analyze motion behavior to analyze movement that's on screen. And then we used a parameter behavior to track the text position to that tracker, the analyze motion. So that's one way that you can track movement that's on screen. And ideally, like the Apple document says, those reference patterns and those points you're using are going to work pretty well. If not, you're going to have to do some manual keyframing in addition to the using analyze motion. You're going to want to combine both of those together. Now, the nice thing about this is you don't have to do everything, right? It's not rotoscoping where you are going frame by frame across your entire project. Hopefully you can use this analyze motion behavior in the trackers to take some of the work out of all this. So this is kind of okay, but if we want to do a little bit better with motion tracking, a little bit more detail, we're going to want to use multiple tracking points. And inside of Final Cut, you do have the ability to do multiple points for tracking, and we're going to do that. I'm going to bring up another project here. Let me close out of this one. We'll close out of our tracker. So here is a completed project, and someone this morning sent me this clip, and let me show you the original clip here, which looks something like this. And they wanted something tracked onto this blank sign that's back here. Now, unfortunately, this video is actually coming from a video game, and it's computer generated, but it's also doesn't have these little crosshairs on it, so it's very tough to track on this. But I've gone through and I added some of these little tracking points, and you'll notice as I scrub across this roughly 2-second, 3-second clip, those little tracking points are kind of stuck in there as if there was a sticker on the physical sign with the tracking point. So we can actually use the built-in tracker and work with this clip. So let me close this out. Actually, we just create a new project here. So Command N, starting from scratch again, just so you can see this. And we'll create a broadcast one, that's fine. And what I'm gonna bring in is that clip. So that's the first thing that I want. So here's the clip that we're gonna use. Again, very straightforward, very quick clip. So I'm just gonna drag and drop this onto my empty group back here. There's the clip. I can go to the end here and do Option Command O to set an out point, and that's really all we need to see there. We can zoom in. So when you want more complex tracking, you can select your clip, go up to Behaviors. We have the motion tracking group, and a second ago we used Analyze Motion, which that's great for one tracking point. But if you want more than one point, you can actually use this option that says Match Move, and it'll do multiple tracking points and allow you to match something on, as far as the movement goes, onto somewhere. So before I do Match Move, I'm actually going to apply that to a different clip. So here's what I mean by that. Let me Command Tab over. I'm going to get a video clip, which I believe is in here. Yeah, here's an episode of 6 and 60. If you follow and subscribe on YouTube here, you know what that is. I'm going to bring that in because I actually want to put this 6 and 60 episode onto that billboard that's in the background there. So let's go where the title comes in. I'm going to hit I to cut the in point of that. We'll go over here to the end and hit O to cut the out point. Okay. So if you're a little confused, you should have seen a second ago the example, but essentially what I'm going to do is put this video onto the billboard in the back there. But I want it to track along the movement so it looks a little bit more realistic. So to do that, that's where we're going to use that match move behavior. And hopefully you can apply this on your own clips and it'll work pretty well. Let me go back and recenter all this. There we go. Okay. So with the clip selected, Let me do Command S to save this. You want to make sure that you're saving all of your projects in motion in case something quits or closes. So with our 6 and 60 video clip here selected, basically the source that you want to be put onto something else, you're going to go up to Behaviors, Motion Tracking, and then click on Match Move. And when you do that, you should not visually see any changes to your project because you haven't told it to do anything yet. So what we need to do is go over here into the inspector and kind of understand this match move behavior. So our source clip right now is the clip with tracking markers, this one on the bottom, which is great. That's what I want my source clip to be because that's where the actual trackers are going to be. And then if I look at it, there's an analyze for the movement. I can see transformation. I can adjust both position and scale and rotation if I want to, which I do actually want to do all of those. So I'm going to enable scale, which if you'll notice there's a tracker in the middle. And when I enabled scale, we got a second tracker here, which is used for looking at the scale and rotation. If I want to, I can enable that as well. So you do want to do that. If you just want position, like we did in the first example, you don't need scale and rotation to be enabled. But if you do, you're going to want to use those. So now we need to move these little tracking points into the spots that we need to actually track. So if you click and drag it, you'll see it is using the video behind, it's using what our source is, but that can be confusing. So just uncheck your 6 and 60 clip, and by unchecking it on the left there, now you can see the original clip. And what we need to do is just drag this little point onto one of our trackers in the background, and then the second one is for the rotation and scale, so I can drag that to another one of these points as well. And if you have these crosshairs like that, if you've actually put these points on your physical objects when you recorded the videos you're using, it makes life here with tracking so much easier. So now that I've done that, I do want to track this. And actually, it wasn't on the first frame here. So I'm going to go back to the first frame and then go through, move and adjust these points back onto the crosshair. One little tip here. You can look in the viewer on the canvas, or you can look inside of the tracker. So over on the left side here, notice you can see a blown up view of where the crosshair is being added. So I want to make sure it's right on where that cross is, and that is good. And now I'm at the beginning. Everything looks good. I'm going to hit analyze, and now motion is going through and creating points and analyzing these. Because these points are white and black, they're extremely clear what's there. Motion can do it without any problems. It doesn't run into any issues. So that looks really good. And then if I enable the 6 and 60, the video clip again, you'll see now as I move across it, it is zooming in correctly following that movement. However, the clip itself is way too big. So I'm going to use my scale to scale this down. And I'm going to use just in the canvas here, I can readjust the position of it. Maybe we'll do a little bit bigger. Can rotate it just a couple degrees to cover up that sign in the background. Looks pretty good. I mean, this is extremely rough. I'm going to do Command S because you should always be saving. Let me get rid of the audio. We don't need that part, right? And there we go. And now if we watch it, I deleted it. Let's unlock the audio and get rid of it. So unlink those, now delete it. There we go. Okay, so now if we play it, it's not tracking for some reason. Let's see why that's happening. Because it should be. So I'm going to collect the match move, and this is something you may run into. Yeah, it looks like just when I clicked on it, then it figured it out and went to where it was supposed to go. I'm not sure why it did that. But that can be something you run into. Motion is a pretty complex app, so if you run into issues with it, definitely try and see why it's there. If it continued to have issues, I'd probably go in and quit motion and then relaunch it. So if I play it, you can see there are videos kind of tracking. It's not great. It's kind of close, right? But it's not perfect. So if I go back to my match move behavior, I might look at these points that it's using and adjust where those points are. So I use the top and the lower spot here for the analyze motion. Maybe I didn't want to do that. I could move it to the top point as well. But remember, just like the first example, you can go in on any of these and go through and essentially adjust those. You can go through and add keyframes and adjust them where you need to. So that's kind of one way that you can go through about this. Now, this is all done using transformation as the type, but let me show you another type here. I'm going to delete this match move, and I'm going to start from scratch again. So with the video clip selected, I'm going to go up to Behaviors, Motion Tracking, Match Move. And this time, instead of using transformation, I'm going to change that to 4 corners. And what does that do? When I hit 4 corners, what you'll notice here in the viewer, and I'm going to zoom in here and make this a little bit bigger. But what you'll notice is I have now 4 crosshairs on all 4 corners of this video. And what I can actually do is click and drag these corners onto the actual points. So I'm going to drag it right onto my first crosshair there. I'll drag the other one over here to this crosshair, right about there. And, oops, double click there. Let me go back to my match move. So if you're someone who is used to this, you may have gone in and decided that you want to replace a TV screen or maybe your iPhone screen. This is one way that you can do it. Now I've lost my cursor. Okay, took a quick break there because I lost my cursor, and that's something I think is coming from screen flow from my screen recorder. But if that's the case, I just quit Promotion and relaunched it, and let's go back to it. So what I'm doing is adjusting these corners to attach them to the little crosshairs for all 4 corners here. That is what the match move is when you change the type to 4 corners. And right now it's saying that I'm attaching the source. I could say I want to mimic the source as well, which is just essentially mimicking the actual points. It's not going to directly attach them to each of those points. Because if you look at this, if I scrub through it, I don't want it to stay in these corners. I actually want to cover that up with it. But now that I have the 4 points added, I'm going to go and click Analyze. And this is going to analyze the motion of all 4 of those points, similar to what we did a couple minutes ago by doing it on a single point, except now it's all 4. So expect this to take longer because it is it's essentially a lot more processing. It's 4 times the amount of processing. This was only for a 2-second clip. So if you have a long clip, that can take much, much longer. And now that I've done all 4 points, if you're watching as I scrub through this, it's actually doing a really great job of tracking that. And I can go on my video clip here, and I'm going to increase the scale, maybe adjust the position a little bit so that we're covering up our content there below it so that we get roughly the tracking of that. So that is using the 4-point tracker. And again, this is very rough go at it. I've only done this over the course of about 5 or 10 minutes here, but you'll want to spend a lot more time refining this as you go through if this is something you're actually doing. And if you can put these little tracking stickers on an actual object that you're recording, you'll find this motion tracking is much, much nicer. So now, kind of one last demo here, just because you've made it this far in the video. You obviously are invested in this. So to see a little bit more and kind of understand more of how this motion tracker works, I want to show you how I created this clip that you're seeing here that has all 4 of these little crosshairs on this clip, because the original clip did not have those. So how did I do that? Well, let me close out of this document. I'm going to open up my completed one. To create this clip, I started with the original video, which is this clip here. So let me uncheck those points. Here's the original clip. Pretty straightforward, right? And then I created and added these tracking points onto each of them. And I'll open up this folder so you can see this. Each of these trackers is essentially 4 separate circles broken up. And I used match move and some analyze motion to create all of this from scratch here. So this part, I'm going to go through just raw, starting from scratch, and show you how I created this. So in my group here, I'm going to take my video layer. I'm just option dragging it to create a new group. And I'm going to essentially hide and lock these other 2 groups, because we're going to start with just this video without any of these analyze motion on it, just from scratch. So the first step is I did have to start analyzing some of the motion on the clip here because I do want to put the little crosshairs on them. So to analyze motion, we can do like we did at the beginning. This is a review of everything I've showed you so far. But I'm going to go up to Behaviors, Motion Tracking, and then click Analyze Motion. I can then on my video here go through and select a point that I want to analyze. And I'm looking for contrast, right? So I don't actually like starting on this zoomed out. I'm going to start at the end of this video because I find that easier because we're closer to the sign here. It makes it a little bit easier for me to look at some contrast areas. So these holes in this background actually work really well. So I'm going to drop the little crosshair right in the middle of that hole there. I'm going to go in the inspector. I'm going to check this box that says reverse, and then I'm going to click on analyze. And watch in the viewer as we analyze that motion as it's going across. Now, in this case, it didn't work well. If you run into this, you hit the X, it's not tracking it correctly. So I don't like that. I'm going to go and reset this and try this again. To reset a tracker, next to the track 1, just hit the little reset button here. It's kind of like a U-turn icon. Just click that and it resets it. We'll go back to the end of the project using the playhead, and then I can move this to a different spot. So that hole at the top left maybe it's too big, so let's try another little spot here, and you can see how this background is all speckled, and it probably looks pretty good on the video game, but it's awful here for trying to track because all these shades and these holes, very confusing for motion to try and figure it all out. But again, I'm still on reverse, so I'm going to hit analyze again, try to analyze that motion, and looking at it, this seems to be doing a much better job of tracking that point that's on there. So that's good to see. And then once it gets all the way to the end, we'll go over and analyze another point. And I'm going to go through all 4 corners here and analyze them all so you can see this. So that was the first one. Now in your layers here, it's going to be confusing to have 4 analyze motion behaviors. So I do recommend renaming these. So this is the analyze motion for the, this is the top left. So I'm going to put that in there. And I certainly could add multiple tracking points to this one behavior, but for organization purposes, at least for my methods of things, I found it easier to go through here and just add a second, third, and fourth analyze motion for each of the points. So this one we're going to say is for the top right. And moving around here, I'm going to go to the end of the project again because it's easier to see when we're closer. But at the top right here, let's use one of these, this little darker spot here. We'll see if that works out. And then I want to reverse the movement and hit analyze for it to go through and track it. So far it's doing an okay job. And at the end of this video clip, it kind of quickly zooms in. There's a lot more movement there. The most of this part here, the first 1 second or so, is pretty slow, so it's usually a little bit easier for the tracker to figure it out. Now, in this case, it did lose it. We can see the X here. It lost the tracker and wasn't able to do it automatically. And the problem with this is we're so close, right? Looking at the timeline, we only have, 15, 18 frames or so left to go. So I don't want to give up on this one. I want to zoom back in and see if I can fix this. So zooming all the way in here, I'm going to go on the last frame right here. I'm looking at the little white point that is highlighted because that lets me know which actual part on this tracker is active. And it looks like this one right here is where it loses. So I'm going to delete these keyframes. I'm going to move my crosshair to this spot, which you don't see it right now. So I'm hitting Z to bring up my zoom tool and zoom out. That way I can go up and see my crosshair here. This is actually really important. Let me call this out. So make sure that you're on the adjust item tool, which is this one at the bottom, not the transform tool. Adjust item, that's what shows all these points here. And then I'm going to grab my crosshair and bring it back down and place it back on the point. Right on there. And then in my inspector, I'm going to click on Analyze and have that continue on. And notice it did a pretty good job there, right? So that's how you can correct something when an basically when the analyze gets halted or stopped for some reason. Now, in this part, we can see a couple drops and some big changes in the actual position of everything. So that's something that you want to just keep an eye on. Here's the deal. This orange part, if you look over on the left side here, we're only tracking the X and Y position. The orange is just how confident the tracker actually is. So at the beginning here, it's like up at 100%, it's doing a pretty good job, but down here it's a little bit lower. So that's what this orange one is. You don't have to worry about that one too much in this for our purposes here if you're just learning the way that this tracker works. Cool, so that is tracker number 2, and this is going to be for the top right. So I'm going to rename my tracker here, top right. And let's go and do it again, right? Video layer selected, going up to behavior, motion tracking, analyze motion. There we get the point, and let's do the lower left corner. If I go down here, looking around, it looks like this area's got some black along with the kind of rusted red color back there. So I'll put it in there, and this time I'm at the beginning, so we'll try just analyzing from the beginning and see if it can do it. I'll hit analyze. And so far, it's doing a pretty good job. I already lost it, though, right there, right? So it lost it. So let's go back a couple frames, and let's see if we can fix it. I'm going to hit the Z key to bring up the zoom tool. I'm zooming back in, and I'm going to go back a couple frames here because it's following it there. I can see in the background there that it is following it. And right here, it doesn't really have it. So I'm going to actually delete these last couple keyframes, move back to the left, and adjust my tracker frame here back over into the hole that I was tracking. And then I'll hit analyze again. Seems to be following it fairly well. And I'm looking at that orange keyframes on the at the bottom there. That's the confidence. I can see that the confidence right now, at least, it's kind of slowing down. Oh, there, it dropped way down, and now it's lost it, right? So that's what this orange one is. You can kind of keep an eye on that because that lets you know how well it's doing. If the confidence is low, then it's not doing a great job. But again, as I scrub through here, looking at the highlighted white dot as I move across, that dot's moving right where I expect it to be. Even up to the last one, it's pretty close there. So I'm just going to go right there and move the crosshair back over. Tell it again that we're hiding right in these black pixels here. Probably right at the top of that area. Right there. And we'll hit analyze again. And there you can see just how quickly my confidence just dropped in the tracker there, or how quickly motion kind of lost it. It looks like that little black area is disappearing, and that's the big problem here with analyzing motion on a video game is these pixels aren't real things, so they can disappear and come back at any time, which is unfortunate. So it looks like at this point it kind of blurs out and it loses that little black spot that we were following. I mean, you can see it just shrink down. So in this case, I might just go through and add some manual keyframes, but we'll try it. We'll try moving this over and see if we can analyze it, see if it figures anything out. Yeah, it's doing an awful job at this point of tracking on those points, but I can just move this and then hit another track and, you know, maybe it'll analyze it going to the end, but it's fairly close. It's not great there at the end, so you might have to do some manual keyframe with that one, but for the most part, we got most of that lower left corner. So let's go on to the next one after we rename it. So this is the lower left. And then I'm selecting the video, behavior, motion tracking, analyze motion. And let's start at the end and go back. Again, I find that works pretty well. And so now we're going to analyze the lower right corner here, which on this clip is a disaster. This lower right corner has some bushes and trees in front of the sign. Most of the sign is missing. I mean, this is a whole mess over here. So this part, though, is going to be good for the example because you should be able to see some things here. So as I zoom into this, I'm going to use my timeline here to play through this clip. And what I'm looking at is the movement of these trees and any part of the sign that I might be able to grab onto and track through the entire project. And what I'm looking at is a couple areas here, but one area specifically, which is up here. There's a hole here and a hole up here that has some dark areas that might be all right for tracking. We also have a little point way over here that could be okay as well, except we want to try to stay towards the corner of this object because the goal is to get 4 of those little tracking points all around it. So going all the way to the end, let's try this lower left part and these darker pixels here, and we'll see what luck we have, if any, on here. So again, this I'm going to do reverse. I'm going to check off the reverse box and hit analyze. And looks like it's okay. It's doing it. No, it failed right there. So it failed pretty quickly. So I'm not going to go through and try to manually fix all of those. So let's reset this one. And let's move it over and let's see if we can grab another spot. Let's try this dark area right here just for the fun of it. And I'm going to hit analyze and we'll see if this dark area can do it. And with this one, what I hope is it should work straight through, right? Because it's a dark circle about that size. It's pretty small in the grand scheme of things, but for these tracking purposes, it's large enough, but not too large that it can grab onto it very well. So that's an example of a really, really nice spot. So it tracked it perfectly, right? However, in this case, I want to be closer to the edge. So let's reset that one. I'm going to go back to the end of the project. I'm going to move the tracker. Let's try tracking this dark edge of the kind of rusted out spot there, and we'll hit analyze. So far, so good. Oh, the confidence went way down. Somehow it jumped out way over here. Not sure why I did that. So that area is not working too well for me. So let's reset again. So now let's go back and look at this whole project and see if there's maybe another area on here we can use as a tracker. And what I'm looking at is we've got some points. If I zoom all the way out, we've got some points up here that might be dark enough that we can use as a kind of a latch onto. So let's try this little area right here. I'm going to go up and drop it onto that little spot. And I'm still reversed, which is great. I'm at the end of the timeline. So now let's hit analyze again. And there it goes. It seems to be doing all right with tracking that. And this is where an eGPU or an iMac Pro having a whole bunch of power behind your motion app is always a great thing, because these kind of renders here and analyzing will go much, much faster. So it did an okay job of finding that one. It didn't run into any issues, so we should be okay. We'll try that one and see. But you can see where this one is located is not going to be the best for our purposes here, but we'll call that the lower right. Little right corner there. So looking back at the completed project on this video layer, well, what we had is all of those points were tracked, right? So I had all 4 of those. So now the next thing was to create these actual trackers. So I'll show you how I just created those little points. And that was done using the circle tool. And I'm just holding shift to create the circle. I'm then going to select the circle and crop it. And I'm cropping the left and the right side to about halfway through. Actually, not left and right, left and bottom here. And we'll go to, what is it, like 145 on each of these. And then I can duplicate this circle so that we have 4 of them. And I'm going to use the properties to rotate these, essentially get them all into each of the spots. So I want 90 degrees for one of them. I want 180 degrees for another one. And then the third one here, I want to -90 to go back. And then for 2 of these circles, under shape, color, I changed it to black. And do not have the correct one selected, so let's select those 2. So I want the opposite circle selected. Okay, and then you can go through and do a much better job of cropping these correctly so that they're not, so that they're actually symmetrical on there. But with the key is, the most important thing with this is to make sure that you have one specific point where the black and white and everything meet. So something like that is okay. So then I grouped all of these together, right click and group, And this is just a tracking point. And then to actually track the movement on here, I can just go to properties. And this is one of the first things I showed you in this video on the position. I can go here and add a parameter behavior, which is track. And in this case, I'm going to track it to one of the source trackers, which if I click on this, you won't see as many of these. You'll have 4 of these, but this is the video, and we're analyzing which tracker that this is going to be. So let's say that this is the lower right tracker. I'll click on that one. And now you'll see that point moves. I can adjust the size and position of this. This was the, I believe it was the lower right one. If I get that, so we'll move this over to the lower right corner. Which looks like that. And now I can duplicate this tracking point. Just Command D to duplicate it. And now I have all of the points that I need, and I'll just adjust where these are on the actual board in the background. And then after I've adjusted the position of each of these points, now I have to change the track for each of them. So this is the upper right corner. So on my behavior here, I'm selecting the Analyze Motion, which is the top right. That looks good. This is the lower left corner, Video Copy, lower left. And then our last one here is the upper left, top left. And then if we scrub through this, you can see how those points, not great job of doing it, but they kind of adjust where they need to be. So then if we exported this video, we could re-import it and use it for the purposes of tracking something. So that's kind of an overview of the, under behaviors, motion tracking, the analyze motion and match move behaviors. So the key is you're using a lot of these analyze motion behaviors to track specific points. But what you should definitely take away from this is that your video and the actual source that you're trying to track needs to be something that can actually be tracked, right? It has to be something you can visually see the whole way through. If you can't see it, you're going to be keyframing, and that's where you have to do some of that manual work. So that is what I have for you. I'm sure you're going to have more questions for this. I'm going to leave a couple links in the description below to some of the support articles from Apple that talk about the tracker in a little bit more detail. But you can also go up to the help menu and learn way more about it in there as well. I didn't even talk about things like the auto zoom, the look forward ahead frames, which might be useful if you have more fast moving content. And there's many other things that you could do with these trackers, especially if you want to get into the advanced details. And Apple has done a great job of documenting those. So don't hesitate to go up to the help menu and go into that documentation. It's there for a reason, and you can learn a whole bunch. So if you like the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up down below, but definitely leave a comment. Let me know what you thought, and have a wonderful rest of your day.